company dedicated to enhancing leaders' ability to harness and optimize trust as a strategic business asset. We talk about trust is the difference here in our podcast and lots of topics around that. And so today I'd like to just sort of discuss a little bit about trust is the difference, yet all humans are self-interested. How do we work with that dichotomy?
Oh, yeah. Well, you think about, we need to define it, of course. And so self-interest, and then the idea of interest in itself. I'd say self-interest is not yet or unmet, unsatisfied wants or needs, and they can be intrinsic or instrumental. So I would say, yeah, self-interest is not yet satisfied intrinsic or instrumental wants or needs. So we can unpack that. There's lots of interests that we could have.
Yeah.
What are some of your interests?
Yeah. Well, I think about, wants or needs, right? And oftentimes those two things get sort of intertwined and we don't always even know what the want versus the need. Certainly if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's, the baseline level of things that we need from a physiological and a safety standpoint. But eventually we get up to that socialization and self-actualization needs. And I think that's where a lot of this self-interest that maybe for our listeners is important to be thinking about, what are we trying to achieve when we trust or don't trust in those self-interest moments? And what are we looking for? What kind of returns and how might we unpack that in terms of what the outcome would be if we do trust or not trust in those situations?
Yeah, we're processing our interest all the time. It's just like trust, it's a psychological state and process that we're working through. We have an interest, and it's not just that self-interest benefits only us. We can have a self-interest in helping others, even a stranger, right? You can do that. You can have everyone has a different package of interests at any given moment and feel in a different magnitude of how much they really desire that thing. Is it more of a want and I can do without it, or I can wait for it? Or is it a need I need today, or I will die, or someone will be harmed, right? So we're processing these things in the background all the time, regardless of the situation. 1,000, 10,000 times a day, we're processing these things. How safe do I feel in this room right here? When I go to this other room or I go outside, how does that change? Do I feel more or less safe? How does that affect my interest, my desire for getting home safely to my family? And then how does that affect how fast I drive? Or if I fully stop at the stop sign, or what the littlest of decisions. Yeah. These are all interests that we have.
It's no wonder we're tired at the end of the day. Making constant decisions and processing information all day long. I think of this, in a more corporate setting, people are walking into a room, they're in a meeting, and they're constantly assessing who's in the room, what can I share, what can I not share, am I aligned, not aligned? And so that method of emotional intelligence and really thinking about, am I aware of, is this a want or a need? Do we have mutual self-interest here and that I want to advance something? Is the environment trusting and that I can bring this up and take some risks? Do I trust that what I'm going to share is going to be received? My intent is going to match my impact. So we're processing that constantly in terms of our own self-interest. So for our listeners, how do we really think about how to create that environment where we do get a mutual self-interest so that people are willing to be vulnerable, to trust, to share, to take risks, to share information that's pertinent. I think about in today's world, you can't make decisions alone. It's rare, and most businesses are operating so interdependently that if we've got someone who's withholding information, it becomes detrimental to us making the best decision.
Well, that's true. When I'm thinking about someone's interest, everybody's interest in the room that I just walked into, I'm thinking, what are the different combination of capital that they're interested in? That's how I think. As a social scientist, I'm thinking, are they interested in money? How much is fiscal capital a part of their interest right now versus physical capital? items, material, different things, a home, whatever, an office,
Hmm.
or knowledge, like human capital, the knowledge and education and information versus power and authority, like political capital, the ability to influence, and even social capital, right? Connectivity between each other and access to other forms of capital. That's what I'm thinking about when I walk into a room. And so you walk into a boardroom or an office with someone in it, then you can process, what do I think their interest is? And then also for yourself, before you walk into that room, what are my interests? Why am I walking into this room? What am I bringing in? What do I hope to leave the room with? What is my interest? What is the combination of things that are factoring into my interest formation?
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, I think this is where emotional intelligence becomes incredibly important, right? In that recognizing our self-interest first, and then who is it across the table from us, their interests, and making an assessment. I mean, as you remind us all the time, we have to optimize the trust, not necessarily maximize.
Mhm.
So, in the case where some people want to come in and just share everything that's on their mind because that's what they need and they want, and they're going to make it happen, but maybe the person across the table, it isn't the right time or the right environment to have that conversation. So, optimizing the trust and the recognition of we are all self interest driven. Um, yeah, it's interesting because we talk a lot about psychological safety and creating the right environment for us to optimize trust. So I'm
Mhm.
curious how you would respond to that aspect and what you would give our listeners to help optimize the trust in creating that psychologically safe environment.
Well, yeah, when I'm walking into a room, I'm thinking, what is the potential benefit, and is the risk low enough for me to make myself vulnerable in the context? So that's what I'm thinking about. Do I have, and I think you've talked about courage before. Do I have the courage? Do I
Mm.
have the courage to put myself out there? And that's about risk assessment. And so if we have a more trusting environment, if our trust is more optimized or higher than rather than lower or having distrust together in an organizational environment, then we can be more open with each other. We can have more cushion in our relationship when something does go wrong, and it will.
Mm.
And we can then also try to purposefully align our personal interest with the organization's interests, and as well as our co-workers' interests. And when we do that, then we can optimize trust better, and we can be moving in the same direction better together.
Yeah. So important to really think about, as you said, what's the capital that someone is after in this conversation or in this situation. I worked for a leader one time that did a phenomenal job of really creating the right environment of bringing information to him. In that, I think all leaders, again, the lack of trust is one of the biggest threats to business because when people don't bring you information that's pertinent to your decision making, you lose, right? You
Mhm.
become less competitive. But in this situation, he created the right environment, a situation where his strategy and direction was headed one way, and I had a piece of information that I felt like if he was aware of it, that he probably would change his direction. And I hesitated. I wasn't sure if, and I think a lot of people ask themselves this question: can truth speak to power? Certainly, he
Mhm.
was, my boss, and he was a very high level in the organization. Could I bring this information to him and have him receive that in a way that was productive? And I took a chance. I took a chance, and he received it in a way that was super productive and appreciative of that was a blind spot and ended up changing the strategy in terms of this initiative that he was going forward. I don't know that that happens all the time. And I think what you're sharing is that there are going to be bumps, so it may not happen all the time. But how do we encourage people to still have the courage to speak their portion of their perspective and trust that it's going to be used in a positive way.
Yeah, I think building those emotional intelligence skills for reading the room, have self-assessing themselves as far as their interests go, and then trying to get a sense of others' interests, and then figure out how they can align. How do we align these well together? Because if they're out of alignment, greatly, well, then the risk may not be worth it for them to do that, for them to approach that, or it may be the wrong time. And so we do it. Yeah, we want to encourage our listeners and viewers that are joining us to process this. Think about your self-interest. There can be enlightened self-interest where there's mutual benefit and gain, and that's great when we can find that. But if you can't, then that's okay, and you can process that, and you can realize that, identify it. And so engage with us on this in this conversation on self-interest. It's a core part of trust decision making and trusting behavior. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much. We look forward to hearing from you.